naturally we would use anything and everything around us. So again, that's the stairwell to our office. That's actually my arm with the broken bone, because we had to reshoot that because we didn't like the way the original gag went off. So I think it was just me and the SFX guy who had rebuilt the arm, and we were just grabbing that shot at like midnight one night. And some of the other co-chair people had brought some clients in to show them the office in the middle of the night after entertaining them. And they've just found me and this other guy, and I'm like in the wardrobe, which is like a pair of boxers and a bloody t-shirt, just laying on the ground screaming and pointing a camera at my own arm. And that's just the way we did it then. We just go and do it. So yeah, that was very much the spirit of the time for me in the journey of filmmaking, and VHS was something we just ran at, and we sort of no holds barred, just did whatever we wanted. So yeah.
I'm curious about kind of two tendrils of this. You know, Amateur Night itself has had its own sort of life, both from how it's been influential to people, but also there was a film based on it. So I'm curious how it sits with you now, what you think of kind of this own life it has had outside of VHS, the anthology.
I mean, I think it's been great to see it stick around. It's been great that I Like You, which seemed like a joke to us at the time, has persisted in some ways. Hannah Fierman, who plays the siren or the succubus, depending on how you want to look at it, was Lily is the character's name. She was a friend of mine at the time, so it's been awesome to see her work persist in that way. I like to have a certain humility about it, because you just never know when you make this stuff what's going to stick around and what isn't. Sometimes you think you have a hold of something that will absolutely persist or absolutely catch fire, and you never really know. So it's I'm grateful that it's around. I'm kind of mystified by it. It's exciting to me at the same time. But yeah, I think too, it was if that short is scary to some people, I think a lot of it has to do with, like, you know, the creeping subtext to it, the fact that it's like a send up of bad male behavior, that there's some interesting look at male gazy stuff in it that at the time we thought, you know, you can build tension around that can be the bedrock on top of a short. And so if you feel anxious watching the short, or if you feel uncomfortable or complicit because you are forced to take on the POV of the camera with these characters that are engaging in some bad behavior, then when the blood starts to hit the wall, all that has more of an impact, because it's kind of summoned all this nasty stuff to the surface, is the idea. And we were interested in that at the time. And so maybe that has an effect on it, maybe not, I don't know.
Absolutely. For both you and Josh, you know, Josh, you came onto the franchise in '94. How did the two of you want to approach, you know, it had been some years since Viral, the reinvigoration of what VHS was, and, you know, what you wanted to change, but also what did you want to carry through from the original? What ethos, like, what did you want to imbue these new era of films with?
Oh God. You know, when I came on the VHS '94, the project was almost entirely different. And David had written the script. Chloe was attached. We had Radio Silence, who's been directing the new Scream movies. And I think what was exciting about that, which we've never really been able to get back to and capture, was that was the first time where, like, we were going to be sharing a lot of cast and locations. And it was just, you know, we would still have the segments, but, like, for example, Radio Silence would come on and just direct the finale of the film. And so it felt like what we were doing was something that was, like, a bit cutting edge in anthologies that we don't normally see. But then the fucking pandemic happened and just kind of interrupted everything. And I think it was just like, you know, David went off to do Hellraiser. Radio Silence went off to do Scream. And I think for me, it was just like, as a fan of VHS, it was really just about, like, piecing together all of our favorite filmmakers and just, like, really leaning into the segments and being able to, like, have creative, fulfilling infrastructure. But I mean, as Chloe can attest, shooting that was just chaos. I mean, we shot during a pandemic. She was, you guys know Ratma, right? Storm Drain. I mean, I think like day one during a pandemic, we were like actually in a sewer.
Yeah, that was, that was really insane. I don't know if we just sort of jumped
Go for
straight
it.
ahead.
Yes. Tell us all about being in a storm drain.
Yeah, I mean, I had written this short that takes place in a storm drain, and I remember early on getting a call from, I think the original line producer, or I don't know, somebody who was kind of like, "Are you sure you can even do that? Like, you might want to start thinking about some backups." So I was like frantically like, "Oh God, like what can I do that's still creepy and like works for the story but isn't a storm drain?" And then we got really lucky in some ways because our DP, Jared Rabb, had shot a web series in a storm drain, coincidentally. So he like took us on the tour of the storm drain, and it was really, really perilous, honestly. It was like it had just rained. There was like water, like, I don't know, like almost like 2 or 3 feet up, I feel like. And every part of me as we went deeper into this drain was like, this is a terrible idea. Why are we doing this? In a way, I was like, this is a testament to the fact that we have to shoot here, because if this makes people like a tenth as nervous as this is making me, then it'll all be worth it in the end. So
We did end up shooting the rest of the sewer in a hotel.
that is true. It was half sewer, half set.
We were like, during the pandemic, we had to build most of our sets like inside of like, what was it? It was like an atrium.
It was the atrium of a Holiday Inn.
There's some movie magic for you.
Chloe, Rama almost kind of instantly caught on as kind of a fan favorite in this thing. I mean, can you talk about the creation of the idea of Rama, but also the creation of it, how it eventually ended up looking, all the fun stuff?
Yeah, the idea, it came from a few different places. I think I had seen this kind of famous news story that has circulated on YouTube of like people talking about a leprechaun in Mobile, Alabama, which you should watch if you haven't seen it. It was like very direct influence on the news story in Storm Drain, and I just was tickled by the idea of, you know, people talking in this very dismissive way about a very stupid monster, and then going in and saying that it's very real. And then, yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's like, what's the stupidest thing? A rat man, of course. And David actually ended up connecting me with this brilliant concept artist named Keith Thompson, who I believe did the Monster in the Ritual, did work on Hellraiser. And we had a really long conversation about what the creature would look like. He kind of pitched this very different idea about like a rat mother thing that like its minions like feed off of its teats, and like that would have been cool too. But I think I ended up telling him, you know, obviously I think the xenomorph from Alien was an influence. I think I showed him like the Brundle pod from The Fly, and just something that seems kind of like piteous and sickly and weird. But honestly, I feel like a lot of the brilliance of the design is Keith's work. And then in terms of actually like building the suit, that was all Patrick McGee, who's also completely brilliant, and managed to ship it to us, I think like the day before we had to shoot it. So it was,
He had like 12 days from
crazy.
like beginning the design of, or not the design, like the creation of the Ratma prosthetic, to like shipping it over to Toronto, which is where we shot. I remember tracking it. And it was like, it got stuck at FedEx. And you're like,
very stressful.
You're like, is somebody going to open this and see a fucking like rat monster? Like, what are they going to do?
Nice shout out to my favorite Ratma meme, which was that there was a Ratma Macy's Day float. So marketing opportunity, I'm not real sure if we want to.
Hope no one got stuck in the pants. Tyler, there's something very interesting to me about 99, the way kind of 94 shifted to 99. I want to hear David, Josh, and Tyler, all your thoughts about it. But it seems to me that in 1, in 2, in 94, this discovery of tapes is very much a thing. And in 99, you shifted to sort of the tape itself. You're watching something taped over, generationally, analog cursed in some way. Can you talk about like the creation of that approach to the wraparound, and Tyler, how you wanted to approach it, but also in collaboration?
Yeah, I was pumped to get the call, just because like I was such a big fan of the original VHS. Like that came out like when I was finishing film school, and I was, as a horror fan, I was just like it was the best thing out there for for a minute, and so I was kind of following those filmmakers, and their careers and everything, and so I was excited to kind of hear about it, and then when Josh kind of told me it's like it's 99, and I was like, but you just did 94, so like it's like how was that like what is the evolution exactly in terms of and so but they also were doing it at the same time as 85, so it was a bit kind of like, well, we're sort of trying to find segments and then we'll sort of place you guys like within the movies, and so I started kind of brainstorming ideas for both. And then, I was really just going, because I was like maybe 14 in 1999. So I was trying to like think of all the things that I was anxious about back then. And one of which was kind of American Pie. Like, and I started thinking about those sorts of like, how those sorts of like the idea of sort of like there's a scene, the very famous sequence in that movie where there's just a bunch of kids like watching somebody undress on the internet, and it's played like comedy. And then when you watch it now, you're just like, this is crazy, like, and kind of like where, social media is gone and everything. And so I thought there was some kind of interesting kind of anxiety to dig in around that. And and so once we, when I was kind of tasked with the idea of doing like the wraparound, which has always been a bit of a challenge, like that was a tough one that from like VHS 1 on. And so the prevailing strategy was, why don't we just not do a wraparound? Like, why don't we just try and do something that is doesn't have to hold, like I believe, like David said, like narrative weight in the same way. And so we started kind of talking about like, well, what could that be? And then the idea became like, well, why don't we just kind of see snippets, and then that maybe becomes a segment, and then that way, like my segment was supposed to be kind of like shorter, and so I wrote like 12 pages, and that was supposed to be like a sort of mini one where you'd see sort of snippets. And then once we actually shot it, like I sort of shot, like the idea was that we shot this like sort of mini movie, like one of the characters is 14, and he like is directing like this movie with army men that gets more and more elaborate. And so I shot these kind of out of context stop motion scenes, and then people just thought they were kind of charming. And then so I think Chad sort of suggested that like, why wasn't that the wraparound? And then we had to, I had to shoot a bunch more stuff in my living room, but it was it ended up being like, I think kind of really working for what it was, in that it, you're kind of seeing something that's so out of context, and then eventually it sort of fills itself in.
You also kind of spectacularly finished that segment with the reveal of Medusa, essentially, which was kind of wild to bring this like
spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry. They've seen it. They all subscribe to Shudder, every single one of you. Bringing that sort of like classical mythology or that classical creature into it, how'd you arrive at that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I really wanted to do something that was a bit more of like a Rear Window kind of thing. Like none of the other segments up to that point, which was kind of surprising to me, had been about like kind of like stalking somebody. And every time you're kind of in a point of view where you're sort of watching somebody, you're not sure who's behind the camera. I wanted to kind of do some element of that, except where you're very aware of who's behind the camera. And so once we kind of started kind of digging in around those themes, then it was about becoming or brainstorming essentially monsters that had something to do with gaze, and we kind of stumbled right onto the Medusa, and everything just sort of seemed to kind of click. And then it's just about like working with Pat McGee to kind of figure out like what that looks like, and then also trying to pull like era appropriate references. I was looking at things like Species and things like that. I don't know if anyone's seen that movie. I mean, yeah, but kind of a weird sort of reference, because it doesn't look great, but we kind of wanted to kind of have like that vibe, like that kind of weird sort of lizard kind of quality to it. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun.
Amazing. Natasha, your segment in VHS 85 Technogod has very real references, a very real root, both in a type of performance, but also in some of the technology that's on display that kind of looks funny now, but was real. Can you talk a little bit about where it came from and what people might see?
Yeah, I mean, I think 85 was really interesting because we really threw it all the way back, which was cool and exciting. And I think in a strange way, I think all of the filmmakers, it's such an incredible lineup of directors, and all of us sort of instinctively, without even talking about it, all ran as fast and as far away from Stranger Things as we could. And so that kind of meant moving away from the like glossy nostalgia of 85 and into the sort of gritty realness of 85. So the writer Zoe Cooper and I turned to a space that's very familiar to us, which is sort of like a back alley, black box, independent theater, performance art, and started to sort of imagine our story in that setting. But what was really cool is the more we delved into actual archival videos of artists and thinkers and philosophers from 1985, the more we uncovered a really direct dialogue to our lives right now, to 2023. Things as sort of obscure as the idea of virtual reality, of artificial intelligence, of sort of what is the nature of reality, to something as specific as literally referring to VR goggles as iPhones in 1985. That's what they called it. So I think that was it was part of the process of trying to dive into something that isn't something that people now think when they think of 1985. And that was just an instinct, I think, that all the filmmakers had to go gritty and ugly instead of shiny and neon.
And I mean, can you talk a little bit about what this artist encounters in there? Because there is something really interesting, I think, in the VHS series about, like tape and both technology, but also the occult nature of it and what it can call down.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, we're the 6th movie, which is insane, and also a testament to like the evolution of this series. And so I think all of us were diving into concepts that were a little bit bigger beyond maybe what you would expect in a found footage movie, and that even included, the style and sort of challenging and pushing the limits of what found footage could be. But thematically, absolutely, I think using this artificial world that's sort of this Tron-like lawnmower-esque world to explore what threats may lie, right? So technology, a tool is neither inherently good nor is it inherently evil. I think the anxiety, the horror is whether or not, we as the wielders of this tool are worthy of it, right? And I think that is yet to be determined, but that's sort of the backdrop of it. And I think also we really wanted to do a movie that was a 1-2 punch. Our piece is, like Tyler's, intentionally very short. We wanted to do something that was like just a setup and a payoff. And the performance piece felt like the right place for that. So yeah, we started, the whole creative process really started with the end image. And then we sort of moved backwards from there. But it all started with that image of, our brains being eaten by our tools and our technology.
David, you have this kind of wonderful full circle thing of kicking off the first VHS with Amateur Night. With 85, your piece acts as a bit of a wraparound, but also the finale. You also employ kind of 2 different styles of found footage. Obviously, in Amateur Night, it's very POV heavy. It's really kind of raw and unbridled. And this really takes the form as a TV documentary. Can you talk a little bit about that approach and also what you wanted to achieve with Total Copy? Because it ends up in that place of this really stunning, long one-take chaos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the genesis of it was we knew we needed to do a wrap of sorts. We had to kind of continue the conversation that we started in 99 with Tyler's piece. And we loved the idea of the mixtape, that instead of some kind of wraparound coming in and needing to explain to the audience the origin of the tapes, we felt like that ship had sailed. I think we abandoned it in the series after the second VHS. But there was something rhythmically about coming back to something that was valuable. There was also something that kind of houses all of the movies or frames them. And so this tape over concept was still super interesting to us. It also kind of clarified the idea for the audience that you are watching this relic from the era, cover to cover, with all the nasty tape distortions that it might have. I think we all got a little bit lost in the analog flavors of that. We owe a lot to like the glitch art.
Well, you were actually like glitching these tapes.
Yeah, we actually dumped, we shot actually, Alexander Chinisi, our DP, shot it on a like 40-year-old Magnavox. And then we transferred it to VHS. And then we just like took a VCR apart and we were just like tickling the tape as it was running through the VCR. So all the glitches are real.
How many cameras died in the making of Total Copy, Dave?
I think we lost 2 or 3. I'm not even sure, to be
Pour one
honest.
out.
One was like day 1 of the shoot, right?
Yeah.
I just want everyone who believes that these VHS films are not authentic to VHS to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the haters.
I mean, the tubes were going out in the camera as we're shooting, so you're getting these weird scan lines. All the lights are bleeding across the image, and there's something liberating about spending Shudder's money and watching the image deteriorate on set, and just going, "Fuck it, this is awesome." Also, we're so trained to
We're at the apex of streaming quality.
yeah. It's also just like, you're so trained to create beautiful images. It's really fun to be after this degradation in some way. So of course, all of us, I think, lose our minds on just the tech side of that. But no, we wanted to continue this tape over conversation. And we started brainstorming the idea of if it, what if it was like a different medium? What if it was something where every time you cut back to it, you knew exactly where you were at? And also, like, would it sort of prop up the more immersive singular POV found footage kinds of segments? If it, like, what would it be like to experience a piece of like finished curated media that maybe was shot by this understudy of the scientific experiment who is not a seasoned cameraman, so it's still a little rough around the edges, but it's been edited by the Total Copy news show? What would that look like and feel like? And if we employed a voiceover, like, you kind of come in out of these, scratchy endings to the tapes, and then you would just land in this voiceover and you'd be like, okay, this has a flavor. And part of it was, that we went last. So we had the ability to watch all the other VHS tapes as they've been completed for 85. And we sort of thought it'd be really great to sort of harmonize a little bit of these styles and influences through this. So there were a lot of things that kind of went into coming around to that. And it was a total blast to create this finished documentary of the age and just ape the style and flavor of that throughout. A lot of laughter on set, a lot of fun bringing that to life. But we knew that at the very end of it, part of the found footage challenge to me, and especially going back to it, is that you have to roll this POV first person perspective, hopefully unbroken kind of long take. I mean, found footage is looked at in one light in the horror sensibility, but in another side, it's like Children of Men or, 1917 or these more esteemed kind of immersive pieces of cinema. It's like you are doing that. And when you're tethered to a camera, you have to create a happenstance circumstance for the beats to land. You still have to create beats. You still need the peaks and valleys of any other kind of genre orchestration, but you almost have to get caught not doing it. That's kind of the challenge and the fun of found footage. And I think one of the reasons it's persisted. So having the opportunity to come back and do a found footage piece, I was like, yeah, we can do this documentary, but we're going to do like 7 minutes, just like full on found footage immersion at the end of it, just for us, just because we want to get to do it. So that was the spirit of coming back to the end and showing the audience the raw, unedited tape as a kind of counterpoint to what we'd seen in Total Copy, and maybe serves as its own sort of tape. But yeah.
You mentioned the challenge, I think, of this style, of this mode. I'm curious to hear from everyone else about your approach to it, and kind of, we have news segments, we have teenage home video, we have very static performance art. Kind of what was your approach in the filmmaking of your respective segments?
Well, I think I had it the easiest because it's supposed to look like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing like made it. And so like for me, it was about trying to make the the actual apparatus feel proper. But like a lot of the cameras from like 1999 are like very like they're old pieces of gear. I mean, they're similar to the ones from the 80s. And so when you're shooting on all this vintage stuff, like it tends to kind of die as you're using it. Like we kept like using like cameras, and they would the pixels would start dying, like the individual ones, and then we'd be like, what the hell is that, and then realize that it was all an analog or like kind of the thing is actually breaking as you're using it. And so like once you kind of have that certain vibe, then realizing like, well, what about this? Like the cameras from the area that I was working in had like this thing called the like optical image stabilizer, where it's like when you're like zoomed in, it would try and correct for like the camera shake, and you could like turn that off and on, and it would make it like a lot more unstable. And we're trying to figure out like, well, that's actually a really interesting property about of the camera from like a cinematographic perspective. It makes things really tense. And so we could kind of like employ that at various times to kind of, make it more and less, interesting to what it was. But it's a bit of a battle with technology. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like the hardest part of found footage for me is the fact that a lot of it ends up being a oneer, which I always found very difficult in traditional filmmaking. Like I always felt like that was actually a weakness of mine in film school. I remember we had a teacher have us all shoot a scene in a single shot, and he tore mine apart because it was terrible. So it it's the challenge is, like David said, like you have to find beats within it, but at the same time you have to make it seem very natural. So I remember in '94, by the time we get into the sort of main enclave of these storm drain dwellers, and the camera pretty much, we wanted, of course, we stitched together some things, but it had to look like it was one continuous take. We did a lot of rehearsals for it just to figure out, practically, like, how do we block people to camera? Within that, how do we find the beats? And in some ways that's, the tricky part is, how do you do that, make it very planned, but also, because it's found footage, make it seem very natural, and like this is all sort of like playing out in real time, and you buy it, and yet there's an elegance to it. And I feel like Bruckner did it so well in Total Copy. Like Wreck was a really big influence for Storm Drain because of the news story, and when people do it really well, it's really special and really impressive. But yeah, I find it incredibly challenging.
Yeah, I think it sounds funny, but found footage is really intimidating. I think we all love making cinema, and we love film language, and we love making cinematic pieces. And so to come at it and completely throw out your bag of tricks is, in a lot of ways, very scary. But ultimately, I think it was a really liberating experience, and to come at the puzzle, the sort of mountain that you're climbing when you're making something, and throwing away your tools, ended up being very liberating and exciting in the end. I think specifically for our piece, we made a one-woman show. So we actually just started, everything was just a one-woman show. We rehearsed it with her. She ran the whole thing. I think it was about 22 minutes or something, start to finish. We had live, our composer, we actually put together some samples, some audio samples ahead of time that were linked to pedals that she was manipulating live. She had a dual mic, which all of those techniques are also drawn from actual 80s and 90s performance art. There's an artist named Diamanda Gallis who has a piece called The Litanies of Satan from the late 80s. That was a big influence for us. So we just literally made a one-woman show and then archived it, and that's really was our approach, which of course is completely antithetical to how you put a normal traditional movie together. So it was really exciting.
It's also, I just want to add, like, it's not just, that you have to orchestrate these oneers, you have to provide context for the camera necessarily. And let me add quickly, a lot of standard movie performances don't hold up in found footage. Like if you start talking like you're in a movie, like it might look appropriate if you're looking at, if you're looking at movie proper cinematography, but you put it in found footage and it's just dead on its feet. You don't buy it. It's the same with lighting. It's the same with production design. It's like everything has to be embedded. But I think it's probably the hardest in doing horror because there's such a premium on practical gags. Like everybody here has got, monsters in their movie. They've got huge practical like blood and gore bits. And that stuff traditionally is built from coverage. Like you shoot lots of little snippets and cut it together so as to create the illusion that it's actually happening, and also to kind of hide the seams of a practical gag. And in VHS, you got to figure out how to do it without that. The camera's got to hang on it, or you got to motivate a way to steer the camera away from it, or drop the camera, or only show the audience flash bits of the stuff that works. And so it can be a real challenge to shoot around that necessarily. And I think I speak for everybody. Like that's part of the draw to it is like, can I pull this off?
Totally. And you also kind of like have to make it work for the story. Like in the context of like in ours, we had the lead actor operated the camera like 90% of the movie, which is not usual. And they're really uncomfortable doing. But it was, we kind of had to like sort of walk him through all the compositions and stuff like that. And thankfully he was just really excited about doing it and worked hard to do it. But it helped it, kind of feel natural for everybody, and you kind of have to figure out how you're going to create, that reality.
And I want to embrace that energy. Like, I think that's something I want to bring into even like traditionally made films. Like that energy of, can this stand up on its own? Can you have a 3-minute take that leads up to this prosthetic and it feels satisfying and people have a reaction to it? Like that is absolutely something that I want to bring into my future work as well.
So we're going to go to audience questions in a minute, but first, Natasha, starting with you, I want to know what everyone's favorite VHS segment is. We've got 6 movies proper. Don't be magnanimous. Choose one.
I have to embarrass David Bruckner because Amateur Night was very exciting for me. I had been familiar with Dave's work and a lot of the work of the filmmakers in like the polished versions of their work. And so for me, it was really exciting to see someone whose work I considered very polished do something really like down and dirty, and just like the liberation of throwing the camera up in the sky for like no ostensible reason was really exciting and liberating. And I also want to shout out to 85's Mike P. Nelson's piece.
Yes.
Every time I see that piece, I love it more. So everyone go watch 85 again, and just Mike's piece is really, it's really intense. It's fun, but it's intense. And I think it is having a dialogue again. That 85 to 2023 dialogue, I think, is really present in his piece, and I love it. So.
Yeah. Whoa.
Was about to become a VHS segment.
You're all in the
Is this the performance art thing? Yeah, yeah.
This is the sequel.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, my favorite segment's to Hell and Back on VHS 99, which is a bit, yeah, right. I mean, yeah, the Winters killed it. If you haven't seen Deadstream, go check it out. But like, I mean, and it's a little weird because I mean, I'm a horror comedy guy, and I really liked that the one I got to be on was very much kind of slanted that way. But I mean, I love their segment more, and it's right. I'm just glad that I didn't have to follow that act because it's awesome.
For me, I'd say it's a total toss-up between Amateur Night and Safe Haven.
Oh shit. I'm gonna go with Veggie Masher.
Hell yeah.
That's the one. I love them all, and it's like I'm so close to so many of these. I've gotten to work with like 15, 16 filmmakers just over the course of the past 3 years. So every segment, I know it's a shit answer, but I love every segment so much.
Yeah, I really can't. I mean, it's just fucking impossible. I mean, I feel like not enough has been said about Parallel Monsters.
Yes.
That's one that I think about a lot. Yeah.
That was in VHS Viral, which I think is often considered one of the more under-seen ones, but it has Nacho, it has Justin Benson, Aaron Moorhead, Greg Bishop, a really terrific lineup of filmmakers. Let's play that so you can see a little bit of VHS 85. And then anyone who has an audience question, I believe you should line up. And then if you have a favorite VHS segment, you should tell us what it is and then ask your question. Thank you. Are there questions? Someone's coming. Oh, yeah, right there at the microphone. Hello.
This on?
Yes.
Cool. Right on. Ratman keeps me up at night. I told my roommate, and now she won't watch it with me. So that's fun. I have a question actually about ending. So in horror, and I think especially in short form horror, and especially in short form horror that kind of plays with where the boundaries of the piece are and the bigger form, what do you think are sort of the ingredients for making an ending that has an impact, making an impact that feels satisfying, and making an ending that that it's going to stay with people? So.
So this is a question about endings in horror films and those that make impact. And anyone who would like to jump in, please do.
I think horror and comedy are the same. So it has to be the punchline, especially with short form. So it's the last shot that makes everything else work like a joke.
It's easier to kill off all your characters in a short film. Fact.
Anyone else want to hop in?
Yeah, I mean, I try and go big, but it doesn't always work. But I think it's a good point that that horror and comedy are such kind of two sides of the same coin, in that it's like they're both grounded in misdirection. So you're like constantly looking for that way to surprise people and save your biggest surprise for the end.
I also think I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say I think actually like on a script level, Storm Drain ended differently, and you and Miska encouraged me to like push it, which was great, and obviously ended up so much better than the crappy ending I had before. But I think a lot of it was like, yeah, it's the element of surprise, and even the nice thing about shorts is I feel like you can get away with a more drastic tonal shift, which can work really nicely in this format and not always in feature length. But yes, I think subversion of expectations always helps.
Yeah, I think, and our editor, Gabe Diarioste, and the writer both, at the end of Techno God, we knew that there was going to be applause at the end, but we didn't, I think, until we saw the image just juxtaposed with that applause, that we really felt like, okay, that's our punchline, and we're giving our character a happy ending. She sacrificed herself at the altar of performance, but she got, a round of applause at the end. So
Let's go right there.
Thanks for coming, and this has been an awesome panel so far. I love Stormgrain, so there's that. And the question is, if you guys could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice when you were making your first feature, what would it be?
As for all the filmmakers, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice making your first feature, what would it be?
This is so like basic, but like truly just trust your instincts, because I find as a director, in some ways everyone else around you is an expert at what they do, and you're sort of a jack of all trades. And I think it can be very easy to have that little voice in your head that says, well, what the fuck do I know? This person obviously knows more than me, so I should defer to them. And you should almost, not never listen to that voice, like listen to your collaborators, they know what they're talking about. But I really do feel like what I would tell myself, what I would tell anyone is like, you have your vision. There's a reason that you're directing this in a way that nobody else can. And the choices that you make, even if other people push back or don't understand them, like that's ultimately what is going to make your movie special. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, and if you're making a first feature these days, like chances are it's not a very expensive thing, because usually that's there's not very many big budget first features being made at all right now, and so you got to take that swing as much as you can, my first movie was like a $100,000 small Frankenstein movie, and it was really if you do a movie kind of at that level, you kind of have to make it your own, or else you're never going to get that chance again, and so people, especially in horror, they want to see how you do it differently, and they want to see what makes your Cabin in the Woods different, and I think that's really freeing for the genre. So I'd say just it's similar to follow your instincts, but I would just say swing big.
do not dip into your personal savings account.
That's a good one. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Right there.
Hello. So I would have to say Ozzy's Dungeon, which I'm representing.
Hell
It's
yeah.
one of my favorites. So in '85, this is the first time we've seen a two-part sequence. What was the conversation like producing that? And is that something we would see more of in future installments?
So the question is about the structure of VHS 85, which includes a segment that is split in some ways and allows you to discover how they're related. Josh, do you want to talk about that structure?
Yeah, we dipped into it a bit in '99. We always joked behind the scenes. It's like, after asking Jennifer Reeder to do the wraparound segment in '94, we're like, I don't know that I ever want to approach another filmmaker and be like, hey, do the wraparound segment. So I think for us, it was like growing up, you know, in the 90s and like watching VHS tapes and like going through like my dad's collection. It was very organic it was very common for me to see like my favorite programs taped over other programs. And so I think that's what we were trying to get back to, and just like trying to figure out new like creative ways for us to proceed in this VHS universe that we've created, and do something that like didn't feel gimmicky but felt organic. And we started that with Tyler's, but you know, it was all coming together like very last minute, and I'm not sure that like we felt full. Like Tyler did an incredible job. I love his segment, but it was about like how can we, a continuation of that? How can we build upon that? Which is also why we did 99 coming out of 94, was like, we feel like we have something left in the 90s, you know? And so
Tyler, you were about to hop in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the splitting it into two parts, like you guys had a very logical midpoint that was cool to kind of do like both sides. Whereas like we had more like downhill maneuvering to do that was more around trying to balance the whole overall thing. But
Yeah, but it was Mike that I think it was sort of a proposition we threw out to the filmmakers, was like, think out of the box. You know, you can do a longer short, you can do a shorter short. Like what if there were shorter, you know, what if there was a 7-minute short? You know, I mean, could we support that? And then what if we broke it up in some ways? So we kind of were able to come in off 99 into the beginning of 85 and say, what does this inspire? And I think Mike just ran with it, came in, and I believe he just showed up with 2 scripts.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's the difficult part of doing the wraparound is that like there's so much story in these movies. We throw a lot at the wall, and it's like, how do you tell a story when you're being interrupted by like 4 more stories? And how do you make the audience care? And how do you make those sequences memorable so that like it connects as you move along? So that's the constant journey that we're on, trying to figure that out. And I'm beyond proud of what we did within 99 and 85. And, you know, maybe if we make another one, we'll explore some more things.
Right there.
Thank you.
Hi. I guess my favorite, they're probably tied between 85 and 99. But my question actually is, first, I'm really glad that you mentioned that like horror is a bit like comedy. I've always wanted to know, do you struggle with like pacing? Since like, you know, in comedy, they always say like, you know, timing is everything. Does pacing become something that like you focus really heavily on, or is it something that becomes organic as you're going through the process?
So the question is, how do you all approach pacing in a VHS short, and how significant is it to you?
I mean, I feel like it's the name of the game in filmmaking in general. And the thing that nobody ever told me getting into this was that it's going to be the hardest part sometimes, because the first thing that you're going to lose perspective on is pace, because you're staring at something that you've stared at 1,000,000 times over. So you can't see it anymore. You can't see your own movies. So in a weird way, it's a kind of act of faith that some of this is necessarily landing. And I think particularly in a short, which sort of introduces the audience to in an anthology, introduces the audience to a short attention span kind of universe, you have to figure out how to get to the beats without breaking the credibility of the found footage shtick. It's like, you know, you can just cut, but then you lose the persistence, the immersion of the whole thing to some degree. So I think more so in found footage than anything else, you're trying to find ways to control the pace without breaking the illusion. So we always talk about, you can always cut on a whip pan. So it's like, how does your cameraman, like they have something to look at over here and something to look at over there, because every time they whip back and forth, you can get in and out of the edit. And so you're trying to find a way from the ground up to orchestrate how to interpret pace when you don't know where you're going to land yet. So I'd say it's a very fluid process for me, at least.
yeah, I'd agree with that. I used to be an editor, so I'm always like trying to chop things up in my head. But weirdly, my segment doesn't have any actual edits in it. Like they're all just oneers, and I have a ton of whip pans that I never even cut on because I liked the one take. So it's, you know, it can be quite frustrating in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
Right there.
I apologize in advance if this question is a sore subject, but David, I'm really curious, and it's today of all days. I know at one point you were doing a Friday the 13th found footage movie, and that obviously didn't happen. So I'm just curious how you feel about that.
Sure. I'll make it quick because it's not really VHS, but I'll say I never thought a found footage Friday the 13th would work. I just took the job because I thought we'd find our way out of it, and we did. And then the studio president came to his senses and said, "This is never going to work." And we said, "I know." And so then we did a proper found footage 3D script that I do love that we never got to make. So, I mean, you can't do slasher and found footage.
No, I
really,
agree. Yeah.
unless everybody's got a camera and they're wandering off and getting killed and dropping multiple tapes. So it was a conundrum, but I needed a job.
Multiple tapes. Like that's a wrapper.
There you go.
Oh yes, and for the record, my favorite segment was radio silences from the first one.
Awesome.
Right on.
And right there.
Ooh, I have a question regarding marketing. I don't know if that's applicable to you guys, but I thought I'd ask. I love the tactile aspect of the whole VHS series. You know, you're making this tape. It's all this chunky technology, like big cameras and VHSs and all that. And I was wondering if you were planning on expanding that in some way. Like, I love the idea of something called VHS like mixtape or VHS 8-track or something like that. That would have something to do with like the plot for the next short or something. I wasn't sure if that was something you ever had in mind, but thought I'd ask.
I mean, we joke about it all the time. I think, you know, that DVD fucking. I think I just texted one of our co-producers like with all the slashes IMAX like next. Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's always that's just kind of the fun of making these movies. Is, you know, maybe one day we'll do something completely fucking ridiculous and it'll still be wonderful somehow. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just a lot of fun to be had with the handmade aspect. Like, anybody can make a mixtape, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, one
last
thing-
question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing nobody ever talks about is the editor. Who is constructing all of this for the audience? Anyway, I leave that to you.
Last question right here.
Hi, I'm Brian. Hail Ratma.
Hail Ratma.
Hail Ratma. I guess, you know, as a genre film is just so laden with subtext and trying to reflect our world in a different way thematically. When it comes to horror or even, you know, future VHS potential movies, what themes would you like to explore more within those short segments or in your future work in general?
Questions: what themes do we want to explore in our future
Themes
work?
that may potentially.
I mean,
that what
good,
interests you
good lead in.
specifically.
Yeah.
The clock's ticking down. You got to answer big.
It's not really a theme, but I just want to say I think science fiction horror is massively underserved.
It's interesting you say that. You know, VHS has become an annual tradition on Shudder, and next year will be no different. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about where we're going next?
Yeah, sure. We're making another VHS movie. It's like we planted you for this. You know, behind the scenes, we're always talking about like things that are exciting. It's not lost on us that we're going into part 7. And so we took a look at like some other franchises that got to part 7, Hellraiser, Friday the 13th, Dracula, arguably, Leprechaun, Amityville Horror. And so we're just going to follow in their footsteps and take this motherfucker to outer space. But we're also very excited about just exploring science fiction. And so it's going to be beyond outer space as well. But that was kind of like what brought us to sci-fi horror. There's so many incredible science fiction horror movies, and we just really want to lean into the terror of that. So we'll be back next year with another VHS.
Everyone, thank you so much for coming, for your time. VHS 85 is now on Shudder. VHS 99 is now on Shudder. VHS 94 is now on Shudder. It's a Wonderful Knife, directed by Tyler McIntyre, coming to theaters and to Shudder this December.
Yeah, November 10th in theaters.
Natasha Kermani's Lucky, now on Shudder. Chloe Okuno's Watcher, now on Shudder. Thank you all.
Why do I feel like this?
Thank you all once again for joining us here at the main stage. And thank you so much to a panel from Shudder. we are going to do a reset of this room for our final panel this afternoon.